In another theme of this week, we're returning to an artist for the second time, just like we did with Madness and Dire Straits, right? And this is Kate Bush. Our first take is going to come from Josh, but Matt, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers for us?
So Kate Bush's The Dreaming comes in at number 38 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 3 in 1982, number 301 of all time. It's her second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1985's Hounds of Love, which is a very highly regarded record. We're going to cover that in a regular segment in, I don't know, somewhere down the line.
Running up that hill, baby.
Running up that hill, that's right. This album did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Kate Bush is ranked number 51 of all-time artists on Best Ever Albums.
Well, guys, Kate Bush has put me under a spell. I really like this album. I did not like it at first, but I felt like there was something there, and I listened to it again, and it was kind of like opening up to me. I really like her. I mean, this is by far, we've only listened to one Kate Bush album so far, but this is far and away different than that album. It's very experimental. I will say, I can totally get it's probably not for everyone. It's a very challenging album. There's a lot of vocal and tonal shifts that she gives, which is very kind of crazy at times to listen to. It's interesting too. She kind of layers herself over herself and sings in different registers, or sometimes aggressively. I really like when she sings high. It's kind of got this hypnotic quality to me when she does it. And there's also a lot of different instruments that I think that are on this track. I would be surprised, and I didn't look into this, if rappers had not sampled from her at one point or another. I feel like there's definitely some things here that could be used in interesting ways. And despite all of that, or in spite of all of that, I really kind of liked a lot of the songs on here. Some of them I didn't like as much, but pretty much like every other song I thought was doing something interesting. And especially when she goes into the high parts, like on Suspended and Gaffa, or pull out the pin, or The Dreaming, which is kind of the title track. Those all worked really well for me. Even the last track, Get Out of My House, also works. I feel like she's kind of doing something that's akin to Peter Gabriel in a way. She's taking a lot of elements and kind of making them her own and incorporating them in interesting ways. There's she sometimes, like on a song like Houdini, her voice gets really aggressive and intense, and this album is intense on a lot of ways, and I think you have to be in the right mindset to appreciate it as well. First time I listened to it, I was in a car driving, and it did not work at all. But then when I kind of like sat down and listened to it more intently, I kind of got into its wavelength and groove and liked it. I think there's The Dreaming is such an interesting song. I think she's intentionally trying to use an Australian accent. There's a didgeridoo in it. I think it's ending with some Irish and British folk kind of epilogue to it, and it's, I don't know, this album just kind of has some sort of hypnotic quality. That's the word I keep coming back to. I think the other key point is kind of like the drums and percussion on this album. That really kind of grounds it to this beat, so it's not so like out there that it kind of, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say is the drums and the percussion kind of ground you and bring you back when she's kind of going out on these kind of crazy tangents. And it's kind of got a, I don't know, tribal nature to it, the percussion does. And I think that also kind of works with her kind of ethereal quality in her voice. And I found this the most interesting album this week by far, the one I was most surprised about. And now I'm really kind of looking forward to Hounds of Love as a result of this.
Okay. Matt, thoughts?
I thought it was you.
I'll let you go, and I'll go last.
Yeah, this album is freaking awesome. This is much more of a prog album than Dire Straits. I mean, when I think of prog, this is way more arty. It's way more it's changing. The time signatures changing. Sounds. Just going in so many different directions. And so this to me is much more when I think of prog. Music or prog pop or prog, whatever you want to call it. This is fitting that bill a lot more for me.
I will say, Matt, it kind of, to that point though, it feels totally like her thing, not like a band necessarily of different people all contributing, but I don't know. I just think of prog is kind of a more collaborative thing. This feels like solely her.
Yeah, I don't need it to be collaborative. I'm looking at just what is the song doing, what directions it going into, what's the time. Time signature is a big thing too, like weird time signatures and stuff. And I mean, just right off the bat with "Sat in Your Lap," it's got this piano and going against the drums, which is just a non-traditional beat, rhythm, and style that's going on there, and it's really freaking cool, and it just sets the stage for what's to come. It's also interesting. I'm hearing a lot of like, "There Goes a Tenor." I mean, gosh, I'm not a huge fan or really know a ton of St. Vincent stuff, but God, that sounds like a St. Vincent song. I'm sure that Kate Bush was a major influence on St. Vincent.
Regina Spektor, like all of these different.
I also got PJ Harvey for sure. Like The Dreaming was very much like a PJ Harvey sounding song. So, I do like PJ Harvey a lot. I knew Suspended in Grapha, actually. I'm listening to that. I'm like, this sounds familiar. And I didn't realize that this was a cover, that this band, Rah Rah Riot, an indie band from Syracuse, I have a couple of their albums. And so they covered that on their debut album, The Room Line. And I was like, man, I didn't know, I thought that was their song. So I'm sure that Kate Bush has other songs like that maybe I've heard before other people do it, but it's actually, it's actually her. Really, really, really liked Leave It Open and The Dreaming. I like that 1-2 punch of those two songs there. It's just, it does that cool thing. She does this a couple of times in the album where they have the structure of the song kind of coming in, and then it builds a little bit, and then the drums kick in at the end, and it's just badass. It's just
very
really
like hard drums on that song.
Yeah, and so when the time that's coming in, I'm like, I'm feeling that, man. That's right there. And the closing track, Get Out of My House, has just a really, really cool guitar part. It's so unique. It's so different. It's so. It's just her, and it's and I didn't know really any of this. I wouldn't say that I'm in love with everything on here. I think that overall every song is good. I think like maybe All the Love or Houdini, that they're kind of a little bit slowed down. They're still good, but they don't take me to the level that some of these other songs do. Pull Out the Pin's a cool song. It's just. Gosh, I need to listen to this album. I listened to this album a bunch of times. I liked it the more I listened to it, and I need to listen to this more because there's so much going on here. This is really arty stuff. This is so different, but just I really liked it. And if Hounds of Love is better than this, I can't wait for Hounds of Love. So I'm thumbs up on this.
Well, I'm glad you guys are on the Kate Bush train. I kind of told you guys to jump on the freaking train a little earlier.
In my defense, and maybe our defense, the last one was a true cold listen. When we covered, what was it? The Kick Inside. So that was one listen, and she should not be a cold listen, a true cold listen artist. I mean, you can't. I need to go back and listen to that record because that needs more listens.
Yeah, I mean, this album, you guys didn't mention the biggest thing in this is that this is where she discovers the synthesizer, and she's doing all kinds of crazy stuff with the synthesizer on this, like distortion of her voice, taking her voice and stretching it out sonically. The other thing about this album is this is the first album she produced. So, like, this is her debut as a producer. She's the producer of this album, too. So, when you think about that, and remember, she's still a young woman at this point. I think she's... I think she's around like 23 or 24 when she's doing this, if I remember correctly.
She was born in 1958.
So she'd be. So this was 82, right?
Yep.
Yeah, she's 24.
She's 24. Yeah. So jeez. I mean, she's still a very young woman. You mentioned Peter Gabriel. Josh, and that's one of those seminal influences on her, as is Pink Floyd. I think you remember we talked about she was discovered by Pink Floyd, David Gilmour, I think specifically, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And there's just so much interesting. I've always loved the song "Pull Out the Pin." It's interesting sonically, and then there's that desperate like
wailing, yes,
repetition of that line that works so perfectly in it because it sounds like somebody has a grenade being. I love songs that sound like the theme, right? And that sounds like "Pull Out the Pin" is obviously grenade, right, metaphorically. But I think loosely this album seems to be a concept album about like the patriarchy a little bit, and I think that's where some of the anger comes in a little bit. That's what I'm getting from the lyrics a little bit, but Kate Bush is never going to directly take you there, right? Both sonically or lyrically, so it kind of some stuff is left for you. You mentioned Matt that I think it was either Josh or I can't remember who said she's speaking in different accents and voices. Like a big piece of her is just like performance art, right? She'll take on, in her mind, these roles of these characters, right? Which I mean, Wuthering Heights, right? Which was the first track on the other albums we covered, which is basically her taking on, one of the main characters of the novel. And that's a thing that she does all the time. So there's always an element of performance art with her. But yeah, the synthesizer is what stood out on this to me, along with the traditional instrumentation she uses. She builds in sounds like oncoming traffic is in one thing at one point, and there's choices that are experimental electronic on this album. I'd say there's elements of just experimental music that's on here, but she always is able to take sort of the avant-garde for me and filter it through like an oddly pop lens, but you can't figure out why. It's orally appealing, AURALLY, not OR. Right. But and that's, I think, what her gift is. It's like, you're like, this is such a strange cacophony of sounds and themes, right? And in different hands, it might even be corny or sort of just too much, but she always seems to manage to couch it in something that seems sensible. And I love the fact that she doesn't always sound predictable, but there's an inherent element when you're hearing her that it's her. And it's just such an interesting thing of being a trademark, but also completely catching you off guard. And this album's even more so than The Kick Inside. I mean, as we've mentioned, I'm a little bit more familiar with her discography, so I know what we're getting in the next album as well, so I won't kind of expand on it. But I think this is an interesting move forward for her, and definitely I think the takeaway here is you get a little bit of a look inside of her brain because she's producing as well. So you're not just getting the artistic vision, you're also getting the sonic vision in this. And this is kind of where it comes together, and you kind of see just how she's ballsy. You know what I mean? She's risky, and she's not afraid to put out stuff that could be, a bust or a bomb. You know what I mean? Because it's so against the swim. And she's doing what a lot of male artists are doing as a female. Can we mention that too? Because a lot of the people we've talked about as being experimental and stuff like that fall in like a art house male type thing. She's really expanding that out. And now it seems almost familiar because, I mean, Matt, you mentioned the greatest hits there's tons of people who are influenced by Kate Bush, and she has an odd presence in hip hop as well at different times. I mean, Tupac and, Big Boy of Outkast are probably the two most prominent people who stand her pretty much. There's a video on YouTube you could look at of like Tupac basically did his senior project at like the art school he's in Baltimore, like Kate Bush music, which is kind of funny in its own way. But yeah, I mean, you can't listen to St. Vincent or PJ Harvey without hearing elements, not to mention any number of other experimental female artists.
Fiona Apple a little bit.
Grimes, Bjork, just all kinds of people. Fiona Apple a little with the later stuff, maybe not title Fiona Apple, but when she starts making the 700-word album titles, and certainly her most recent album last year was absolutely something that was in this same lens. So I mean, this is a strong recommend. It's this or the ABC album that was my favorite this week for different ways. I really I really enjoyed this album.
Yeah, for totally different reasons, right?
For totally different reasons.
Totally
yes.
different, yeah.
Yeah, because the ABC album is tied together by bass lines, which is a familiar thing. This isn't tied together by anything. The most common sound is the synth, but it doesn't ever do the same thing.
But you can get the ABC album in one listen of the first song, right? This album, you need. I needed. This was like 7-8 listens for me this week. It was just like I need to, and I still need more. You know that's, and I like that. This is homework, but it's good homework because it's not an initial harsh listen. It's that there's plenty of things in here if you listen to this for the first time that go, oh, that part's cool. That's interesting. That's different. At least for me anyway. It wasn't like this daunting. I guess it can be a daunting task, but I kept wanting to come back because I was just picking out things here and there. And the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. And I just wanted to go back more. So, yeah.
I mean, to John's point, I can't think of another artist that is kind of modifying her voice in the way that she does on this album
she's like this guttural kind of like
yeah,
you know?
She sounds like a monster at times. She goes really high, she kind of distorts it like John was saying. So I guess it's the technology and the production side as well, but I think she takes a lot of chances on this album.
Well, she does it with her own voice, which she's been doing for operatically and going down, but then she uses technology to add sonically like ways of singing that she couldn't do on her own, but by using the distortion and the synth and the expansion of lyrics and stuff, she can create like new voices, right, that allow her to sing different types of songs that she couldn't do if she was singing a higher register. So it's funny. It's some people I think find her music eerie, but I don't. There's always sort of like a underpinning of like hope kind of in her songs, but not like in a, like they're serious songs about serious issues, but they're never in a way to me that like it operates in a optimistic sort of land, but definitely atmospheric too, where like she'll create a setting, but she's always sympathetic to these characters I think she takes on, even if the characters themselves have dark elements. So
well, sonically, that's definitely, there's some darker kind of eerie sounds going on here, so I can see that,
and dreamlike quality. I mean, this album's called Dreaming, and she always has a dreamlike quality to her music.
I
mean, there's a lot, it's dramatic, it's theatrical, but
the
there's
and
that's
art thing is an apt, part of it.
She's like the film score to whenever you say, I had the craziest dream last night. I often feel like the Kate Bush music. I think that's why it's so funny that she ended up in a dream sequence, right, in Stranger Things. Isn't that how Running Up the isn't that how that became a thing? I don't really watch Stranger Things.
I haven't seen that season
yet.
The
song is reused. It's kind of a tether for this one character, I guess. She really likes that song and identifies.
Yeah,
I don't know if she's actually. I haven't seen the show this season.
I think if I remember correctly, it's like a dream scenario where it's kind of like a Freddy Krueger type thing, where like when she's in a dream state, she could be harmed type deal. And I think it's like the music she uses to like get out of that world. How
that sounds
if you woke up, you were away from.
Told me.
That's how I was told, because I asked somebody about. That's how they described it to me. They're like, think Freddy Krueger, but instead of being woken up, like you have to like get out, right, with your own mind, and Kate Bush is who kind of gets her out of her mind. They put the headphones on, right, and she hears it and transcends.
I bet you David Lynch is a fan too, like that, that type of
Stranger Things.
No, of Kate Bush. Of Kate Bush.
He's got his own. I forget who his music. Julie Cruz, right? Is that the woman's name? Who?
Oh yeah,
he has it all of his stuff.
Right.
I just think of like his movies are like the visual equivalent of her music. You know what I mean? Just like kind of just
a little bit
stream of conscious.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Another guy who likes dream. Yeah, dream thinking, and also sort of like dark landscapes, but also with a beauty to them and a quirkiness. Yeah. So they have some shared sensibilities, shall we say.
Boris Johnson apparently is a fan. So she's got that going for her.
I'm sure she's completely nonplussed. If you ever see interviews with her, she sort of resides in her own world, you know what I mean? Where I don't think there's a lot coming in about day-to-day politics and stuff. I don't think that's where she resides.
Doesn't she
I
just
think
not give interviews? I don't think she's. I think she's kind of.
She'll give them to like BBC. It's funny because what stands out to her is interviewers will often ask her to comment on things like in what we would consider to be the real world, kind of, and she does dismiss it. It's sort of like she always goes back to that's not the type of stuff that interests me in the way that like the sensibility of like like I remember she gave one thing where she said like I wanted to be like a male musician because you were able to do all kinds of crazy rebellious shit, and like you could only do a certain amount of rebellious stuff as a female, but it wasn't really rebellious because it was like the same three things and you were told it was rebellious, but as a guy you could do it. But she didn't say it like, and that's why I hate the Patriot. It was more just like, and so I'm going to kind of create these female characters that do, it's never said with malice, but you could tell and then if they say, well, what do you think about like this concert? It would just completely, like not register with her. She'd be like, well, I was thinking about that esoterically, like that's always the vibe I got from her stuff, like kind of she resides outside of like day-to-day triviality. So yeah, which is what a good artist should do, right? They should kind of live in their own world. So yeah. All right, guys, we're going to